recording. Great minds. Okay, great. So if you're joining us today for the very first time, this is a meeting of the Vermont Climate Council. And this is a normal Zoom meeting, which means we're all here together. Our general protocols is if you are a member of the Vermont Climate Council, we encourage you to keep your camera on if you can. If you are joining us, like you are on one of the subcommittees or you're a member of the public and you're joining us, we encourage you to keep your camera off unless it's during the public comment periods. So thanks everyone for just helping out on the Zoom here. We do have an agenda and maybe it's even dropped in the chat. No, not yet. So Liz, if you want to drop that in the chat, I can share my screen with it as well. This is what we're aiming to do. Okay, the first thing we'll do besides our normal sort of minutes is we've worked up some guidance for subcommittees. The steering committee's looked at that, but you all as the council really need to sign off on what that guidance is for this year in the work of subcommittees. There's a little housekeeping thing about confirming Chris to be part of the steering committee. So we need to do that formalization of that process. Then we have some updates, and Rachel Stevens from A&R is going to talk a little bit about some legal process going on. Secretary Moore is going to talk about what's going on with the update to the proposed greenhouse gas reporting rule, which you will remember is a key piece of the council's recommendations. And so Julie will update us on that. And then Sophie Veltrop from the Climate Action Office is going to give us a peek into the final design of the Climate Action Plan from last year. We also have Caroline Pash from Vermont Emergency Management Agency, who's going to give us an update on what's going on for that piece of work around Vermont's hazard mitigation plan. So just as a sort of heads up of that's how VEM is thinking about this. We have some public comments scheduled at 2:30, and then the last piece of business we have is just to make sure we're clear about our plan for the rest of 2026. And we expect to end a little early, maybe even earlier than that, depending on how these different conversations go. Many of these are sort of updates. Some of these are decisions that you all need to either make or confirm. So before we get going, how does that sound? Any questions on the agenda? Any questions about what we're going to be doing today together? Okay, great. Well, let's jump into it. Our normal housekeeping, we have minutes. They're linked here. You can just click right through. I'm not going to do that, but you can click right through here and take a peek at those. I'll give folks a second if they need to have a quick refresher on those. Let's just wait a moment if anybody needs an extra moment to look at those. Does anybody need a little more time to review minutes? Any concerns with the minutes that we need to note? Okay. Well, hearing no requests for more time or concerns, let's consider those approved. Thanks, everyone. Okay. So the first order of business that we have is about guidance for subcommittees, and I'll turn it over to Liz Amler to walk us through the guidance that she pulled together with the help of the steering committee in this year, which is kind of like not a year of building a plan. So Liz, let me turn over to you. I'm happy to keep sharing my screen, or if you want to, as you wish.
If you have the subcommittee guidance pulled up, that'd be great.
Maybe I can make it a little bigger.
Okay, how do I?
Okay.
Great. So this subcommittee guidance came out of questions from, I believe it was just transitions around meeting frequency and scope of work during this period after the Climate Council has updated the climate action plan. So for a couple of steering committees, the steering committee discussed roles and responsibilities moving forward. And this document reflects those discussions. The key points here are that the just transitions in science and data, they have meeting frequency of twice a year or as needed, with science and data, perhaps covering some modeling work during this period and just transition support and engagement work. And all the other subcommittees would be able to hop into council meetings in order to stay up to date on climate council work or stay up to date via co-chair communications from their various subcommittees. And then we've also included just information about per diem moving forward. So let's say, for example, someone from rural resilience, a subcommittee member elected to attend a climate council meeting in order to stay up to date, they would be eligible for the $6.50 an hour per diem, as opposed to the $50 per diem that a climate council is eligible for when attending a climate council meeting. And yeah, those are the key points of this document from the steering committee discussions.
Thanks, Liz.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is something that the steering committee reviewed. It really is something that you as a full council need to sign off on. So if this is an opportunity for questions about it, any last minute edits that you want to do, we could do that too. So let me just pause. I'll leave it on my screen for just a second more and then I'll drop it. But counselors, perhaps if it's the first time you're looking at this and you have questions, happy to do that. And then steering committee members, happy to have you weigh in, explain a little bit more of the logic if we need to do that. But counselors, any questions prior to adopting this? Dr. Leslie Ann, welcome.
Hi, nice to see you all. So I had a point of clarification about Science and Data Subcommittee, and I was just wondering if there are pieces of science that are coming down the pike or changing over the course of the next 8, 12 months or so on. Is there a point to put a placeholder under our responsibilities as a subcommittee to just keep an eye out on that? Because right now it says focusing on feedback about the greenhouse gas emissions and looking to see what other modeling might need to be done. Can we put something in there about climate and climate change as a science in general in there? And maybe have a link to some of the things that are coming down the pike with the hazard mitigation plan update as well as a way to kind of link some of those pieces.
Great. And so a specific edit you're suggesting would be add a bullet in there that says stay up to date on or
Mhm.
something like that
Right.
on emerging climate science. You'll have better words than I, Leslie Ann, but something up like stay up to
You're
date on
doing well.
emerging climate science and
Yeah, you're doing well there, David.
okay. So I'm taking some notes on the side, and so what we can do is if everybody feels good about that, I'll just note that in our notes, and we'll update
Mhm.
the doc with that. Um, all right, so we'll add a bullet. So add a bullet that says something along the lines of stay up to date on emerging climate science and related, you know, uh, related content or something like that.
Mhm.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay. And just let me do a quick check-in with everyone. Any concerns about that, folks, about adding that bulleted in the way we're talking about it right now with Leslie Ann? Something along the lines of stay up to date on emerging client science. Okay. I see a thumbs up from Jared. Okay, great. Okay. All right. Any other feedback, Rich?
I would just like to ask whether the list of responsibilities here is intended to be a limit on potential actions or meetings by subcommittees, or is it just a general statement of responsibilities? I could envision that sometime during the year, there would be a reason for the subcommittee to meet to discuss a pending topic or uh, a matter that's included in the plan that we wanted to speak out on, let's say. And I'm not seeing that there's any limitation here, just a recommendation for members to stay engaged through the overall council process. And I'm just wanting to make sure that there's no negative implication here that the committee shouldn't do anything else.
Um, great. Jael, go ahead. You have a hand up.
Yes, so I just wanted clarification on, is this just for the remainder of 2026, or is this for like the new subcommittees that form that then will eventually like help with the updating of the plan? Just wanted clarity on that. And if it is for the newly appointed subcommittee members, I just think there could be a little more description and what that entails. What their roles and responsibilities are.
Got it. Okay. So there's two questions that we're working with here. One is, is this guidance somehow a limit, right? And to what the work should be, or if subcommittees feel like they want to do something, they should be able to do that and respond to the moment. That's one question. And the other is Jael's like, hey, can we put a little bit more detail if this is intended to inform new subcommittee members that may be coming in? I'd be interested, steering committee members, when you saw this and reacted to it, like what are your responses to those two questions? And then obviously I invite Jane and Liz Amler, who have a role in supporting subcommittees and may have something to say about limits and things. But steering committee members, to those two questions of what does this guidance really mean? Is it a limit to what can happen? And should there be more detail for new members? Of which there aren't any right now, but Jared.
Yeah, I'm just as one member of the steering committee, I'll offer that when this came up, I was seeing it primarily as an attempt to provide some baseline clarity and guidance around the question of the role of subcommittees post climate action plan, with an understanding that the meeting frequency we had been doing in 2025 and before was no longer necessary or really practical given where we're at in the kind of 4-year tempo of climate action plan development. And so just for my part, other people may have seen it differently. I saw this as kind of setting some baseline expectations that yes, it's appropriate for meeting frequency to scale back in this year. And these are some of the baseline opportunities and expectations, but that isn't meant to say if something emerges that is worthy of the committee getting together and deliberating on or responding to, that shouldn't happen. But I think it's a really fair and important question, and it could be worth more directly stating this as kind of like baseline expectations for the subcommittees. That's just my thinking about it. Helpful.
Okay. Secretary Moore?
Yeah, I was going to say much of what Jared just said. Like it wasn't intended to be limiting, more to be direction setting or directional, and can leave it at that.
Great. Okay. Kelly?
Did you have your hand up first?
I'm sorry, David. I jumped right over you.
No, it's okay. I'm not sure who had their hand up first. I agree with what Jared said. The only thing I was going to add is it did occur to me that it might make sense to for the chairs of the respective committees to convene sometime this summer after the session is over, just to convene the groups and reflect on what happened during the session and ask the question whether or not there's a need to do some additional work or development of an issue.
Okay. Let's keep that out there and see if that's something that folks would love to see happen here. Kelly, let me jump to you, then Jael, and then let's answer David's question and see if that's going to be something you all want to do. Kelly?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I was going to share based on Just Transition Subcommittee met last Wednesday. And we talked about the guidance, knowing it was still a draft before it had come to the full council, but talked about, okay, how often do we want to meet? And understanding it, my understanding as a member of the steering committee and also as co-chair of Just Transitions, who kind of asked for this guidance, was, yeah, like Jared said, it's sort of a baseline, maintain this level of engagement, but not that we weren't allowed to meet more if we thought it was necessary. And I can also say for Just Transitions co-chairs, we have definitely talked about keeping regular check-ins throughout the summer. We're probably not going to meet as a subcommittee until the fall, but we'll keep meeting throughout the summer and spring and summer and just check in and say, oh, wait, oh, this big thing just came down. We need to talk about this. Or there's been this big public engagement thing. Let's debrief, just to keep that open as we know things can change quickly and we might suddenly decide we do need to meet. But that's sort of how we were taking that guidance. And to what David was asking, yeah, I think having the co-chairs potentially try to stay in touch and meet more often just to assess the need for a subcommittee meeting at a different time than was originally planned would be really helpful. So I know you didn't ask for that response yet, David Plum, but
Great, great. No, it's good. Yeah. And Jael?
Yeah, so David and Kelly's questions sort of touched on my or their statements touched on my question. But it was, yeah, basically as the co-chair, should I be calling a subcommittee meeting? And, I was waiting for direction from the climate office, but is that something, because there has been legislation that's come up that I feel like is pertinent, but, so is that something I should be organizing? And, I definitely think like a summer meeting would be good too.
Okay. Right. So if I were to summarize where we're at, on the issue of is this a limitation? No, it's a direction of, sort of an expectation and direction of what makes sense, right? Two, should there be a meeting of the committees? So if you look at this, the way this is written now, just transitions in science and data, it's imagined that they are gathering for these specific reasons in 2026. For the other subcommittees, there wasn't identified a reason to specifically gather. However, staying up to date by attending council meetings is what's recommended, right? So that's what's in this document. And what I hear, starting with David Mears and now is like, maybe all the committees, whether it's cross-sector mitigation, rural resilience, or ag and eco, maybe they all should have some kind of check-in, or at least the co-chairs have some kind of check-in to see if there's something that needs to be done. That's what I'm hearing. And I think there's a balance, right? There's a balance between like, is there actually anything to do this year, right? Versus not losing the thread, staying up to date, making sure that folks are being continuing to be engaged on these topics as they evolve. I'd be curious, all counselors, uh, um, how are you feeling about the idea of all of these subcommittees, including the three that weren't envisioned meeting, all of them at least having some co-chair check-ins throughout, at least, over the summer or something like that. Does that seem like something reasonable, Stephanie?
I know that I'm not a co-chair or a chair, but I just wanted to just put my 2 cents in that it's not just that I want to have a better sense of what I am doing. I haven't ever been, even though I'm on rural resilience, I've never actually met as that in that committee. And so when I get asked what I'm doing, apart from talking about the climate action plan, um, I'm not always clear what my response should be. Like, for example, I thought that perhaps I should be out gathering information for the council as well. What things do we want to know? But maybe that's not true. I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to be doing. So I would really, really, really love to have a meeting of the subcommittee that I've been appointed to be on and find out what my roles are and probably just as important, what my role isn't, so that I'm not muddying the waters either. So thank you very much.
Mm. Thanks, Stephanie. Yeah, and I think um, right, and I think what's interesting is like the role in 2026 versus the role in 2027 and 2028, right? We're in one of these years where last year was a very heavy lift in the end of the previous year, and to get an update to the climate action plan, those updates come roughly every 4 years or so. And so we're in a year post that. So it's going to be different than a year in which you are actively starting to get geared up for an update of the plan. What I'm seeing in the chat, I'm trying to keep track of the chat as well, is it does seem to be important that this document include an expectation that co-chairs at least meet and see if there is, a reason to gather the full subcommittee in 2026 or not. So we, I'm just let me check that with everyone. Does that seem like at least that needs to be an update to this document is co-chairs for all the subcommittees should have some cadence of meeting and looking at whether there's something that needs to happen that hasn't been identified in this document. Does that seem like a fair summary of what's going on in the chat? Yeah, David Mears gives a thumb up to that. Okay. Does anybody have any concerns about adding that in here? Okay. All right. Now that's one step short of saying all the subcommittees should be meeting in 2026, right? And I think I'd be curious if there's a strong feeling, in addition to Stephanie's plea of like, help me understand what the actual work is this year. Um, is there, do folks want to put something in this document that says, yeah, actually it would be helpful if all these subcommittees met? Is there someone who would want to, strongly advocate for that? Jared?
I wouldn't want to advocate for that, but one thing that we could add would be encouragement to subcommittee chairs and co-chairs to remind all subcommittee members, not just appointed counselors, that they're welcome to attend council meetings, full council meetings, because I think that that's the primary place. I was also going back and forth with David's suggestion, which I think is a good one, but I also think kind of a post-legislative kind of stock taking of, okay, which recommendations from the CAP were taken up, which were not, where do things stand, would be a valuable reflection and deliberation tool for the full council, not just those subcommittee co-chairs. So I could see it as a meeting of the co-chairs sometime over the summer. I could also see it as just that as an agenda item for the full council, at which, of course, co-chairs and chairs would be at, as well as other counselors and any other, subcommittee members or members of the public who would want to attend. I just want to be, I think we want to, I think what we're trying to do is provide some assurance to subcommittees that if there's not a need to meet, you don't have to hold a meeting to hold a meeting because our time is valuable and we just did do a big lift. But it's also not that nothing is happening. It's just that more of the work I think is going to be happening, at least the intention is at the full council. And so I think a reminder and another invitation that the full council meetings are always open and that that's a good way to stay up to date even when subcommittees are not meeting could be helpful guidance.
Got it. Okay. Does that seem like a reasonable approach for everybody, what Jared just laid out? I'm also looking in the chat and I'm seeing that in addition to co-chairs meeting, that it would be important that there's some email communication or other communication to the subcommittee members about what's happening and what they're doing, right? Okay. All right. So let me just clean up my notes here for a second. Uh, so I have three things in my notes that would be added to this document as it is in the meeting materials right now. One is add in the science and data section a bullet that says stay up to date on emerging climate science and related content. Two is probably a line in there that says this document is intended to be directional. It is not a limitation on what can happen. And three is add a line in under each of the subcommittees, particularly the three that aren't really in this document aren't expected to meet, to say co-chairs should meet at least over the summer and probably with a regular cadence to stay up to date on emerging issues and understand if there's any reason to meet, and also to consider the communication they can provide to their subcommittee, right? And finally, this does say what Jared, you're saying, which is, you know, encouraging all subcommittee members to join council meetings, but we can emphasize that as well. So those are the sort of 3/4 things that would be changed on this. First of all, any friendly amendments to the way I described those 3, 4 things? Okay. So we will capture these in the meeting minutes if you all are okay. Any other concern or reason not to approve this document with these changes? Okay. All right, so hearing no concerns, let's treat then this as okay with those changes that I just spoke to that we'll capture in the minutes. Okay. And Jane's noting we actually need some co-chairs. So if you're listening to this and you're feeling inspired, okay. Great. Thank you, everyone. We made it better through that conversation. The next thing on our list is an official appointment of Chris Campany to the steering committee. Now, Chris got pulled away today. I don't even think he's with us right now. Is that true? But he did offer to come back on the steering committee, which he was on at one point in the process, to fill the space of Liz Miller, who stepped down. So that's a decision that actually you as a full council or specifically counselors that are appointed by the legislature make. Jane, do you have a comment about that? We can't hear you, Jane, if you're trying to talk. At least I
Does
can't.
my audio sound okay?
There we go.
On my
Yeah,
phone?
we got you now.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll come on video, sorry. I just wanted to raise up Jael's comment in the chat before we moved on and just flag, because Liz and I were just going to comment on this for the benefit of the Climate Council, and just remind people that the CAO's role is to help support recruitment for subcommittees. And just remind folks that we did a heavy lift of that just over 2 years ago, January of, I literally can't remember what year.
2 years ago, 2024.
2 years ago, yes. And the 2024, and those, we at that time updated the council process document to align subcommittee terms with council terms. So subcommittee members are appointed to subcommittees for 3-year terms. So there will be a large bowing out and transition of subcommittee members at the end of this year. So I appreciate, Jael, what you're mentioning here, and just want to flag that recruitment for subcommittees will start in earnest at the end of 2026, go into 2027, and we'll be looking to see who wants to remain on subcommittees and how we recruit new members, because believe it or not, that'll essentially be the startup of building up to the next iteration of the plan. Because we're almost a year out from adoption of this plan. We'll go another year, we'll start recruitment, and then kick off into another planning period. So just flagging that I think it's okay to have subcommittees sort of gently staffed and sort of geared up right now, and the CAO will help with that at the end of the year, and we'll look to council members for your support in that space too.
Thanks, Jane. Yeah, that's a good flag. Okay. All right. So in terms of Chris Campany, you all have the final say on that, specifically those who are legislatively appointed. Um, so want to do a quick check. Any concerns about Chris stepping up to the steering committee to fill Liz Miller's space? Any concerns about that? Okay, great. Well, without hearing any concerns, let's treat that as approved by you all. Thank you for that. Okay, so now we're going to go into the part of the meeting that's more about updates. And Jane, that's an old hand, right? Not a new hand? Okay, great. Okay, we got a couple updates here. First, we're going to hear from Rachel Stevens about some legal things. Then we're going to hear from Secretary Moore about the reporting rule, and then Sophie, and then Caroline from Vermont Emergency Management. So, Rachel, are you here?
Yes, can you hear me?
There you are. Okay, yes, over to you.
I'm gonna attempt to share my screen if possible.
Yeah,
Okay.
it should allow you to.
Can't tell what you can see.
It looks great. It's
Okay,
perfect.
great. So I'm going to just provide a really high-level overview of a recent federal action that you may have heard about called the endangerment finding, just to provide general awareness for the Climate Council. I wanted to share that this is going to be a very high-level overview because, as you can imagine, there are many legal issues related to this action that are still being evaluated, and I don't want to speculate. I guess I should introduce myself. I'm an attorney with the Agency of Natural Resources, supporting the Climate Action Office. And so I'm just going to be providing kind of a general overview for awareness. There's likely to be, more developments in the future, and I'd be glad to come back if there are more specific questions after that. So I just wanted to answer kind of what is the endangerment finding. So this is related to a Supreme Court case in the U.S. Supreme Court called Massachusetts v. EPA. This was a case from 2007. This is related to in the Bush administration, the EPA was not interested in regulating greenhouse gas emissions under the Clean Air Act. So there were a series of kind of petitions and legal actions that led to this case for the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court determined that greenhouse gas emissions are considered air pollutants under the Clean Air Act, and the EPA does have statutory authority to regulate greenhouse gas emissions. The court also interpreted a section of the Clean Air Act to find that if EPA was going to regulate greenhouse gas emissions under the Clean Air Act, it needed to first determine if greenhouse gas emissions endanger public health and welfare. So this is an important case to just understand as we go into why did EPA even issue this endangerment finding, and what is EPA doing now? So this is kind of the background. So then in 2009, under the Obama administration, so I guess I should say when the decision came out in 2007, the Bush administration didn't take any action to regulate greenhouse gas emissions. But then under the Obama administration, EPA issued this endangerment finding, which the Supreme Court said was necessary as a prerequisite before regulating greenhouse gas emissions. So in 2009, EPA found that greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere do threaten public health and welfare and contribute to climate change. As I mentioned, this was a prerequisite to EPA taking any action to regulate greenhouse gas emissions. The finding itself is not a regulation. It's a finding of impact on public health. So it doesn't itself impose any requirements. After the endangerment finding in 2009, EPA did issue regulations to regulate greenhouse gas emissions from motor vehicles. So this action, the endangerment finding, did lead to regulations in 2010. So what happened last month? Last month, the Trump administration took two actions to undo what I just showed you on the slide before. So the first is EPA issued a final rule to rescind the 2009 endangerment finding. As we just discussed, this was the finding that found that greenhouse gas emissions contribute to climate change and affect public health and welfare. The EPA also repealed the associated greenhouse gas emission vehicle standards for light, medium, and heavy duty vehicles and engines. So two regulatory actions there. So what this means is that EPA is not going to regulate greenhouse gas emissions contributing to climate change. It has essentially removed its not authority, but it's removed its intention to regulate greenhouse gas emissions. And I just wanted to be clear that this doesn't affect regulations related to other air pollutants, just greenhouse gas emissions. So what was EPA's reasoning? This is a little in the weeds, but EPA said a couple things, or a lot, in its defense. First, it argued that air pollution extends only to pollution with local or regional effects, and that it doesn't extend to like global effects such as climate change. It also made an argument about cause or contribute, which is terms, these are terms in the Federal Clean Air Act, and basically said that, EPA needed to, that there was no connection between greenhouse gas emissions from motor vehicles themselves and the dangers of climate change, and that it was too attenuated or de minimis to support a finding of endangerment. EPA also said that it lacked clear congressional authorization to regulate vehicle emissions to address climate change. For the lawyers on the call, this was the major questions doctrine under the Supreme Court. So basically said that climate change is way too big of an issue, a political issue, and that there's no way that Congress intended the Clean Air Act to be interpreted to allow EPA to regulate it. These are just some quotes from the finding itself. EPA argued that it would be unreasonable to maintain the emissions program because the cost of the regulation is immense, and the value of the regulation is uncertain and de minimis. This is at the same time, that the EPA is actually no longer accounting, or has said it's not going to count public health costs when it's making determinations about its regulations. So it's kind of making a cost benefit argument against regulation. And it also found, that the standards would not have a scientifically measurable impact to mitigate climate change. And it asserts that, these emissions are not harming public health and welfare, and therefore the vehicle, emissions are not improper. I think they also use the phrase futile, that regulating greenhouse gas emissions from motor vehicles is futile and it won't stop climate change, and therefore it's not necessary. One thing that's concerning is what EPA has said about state authority. So in the action, EPA said that it was interpreting the Clean Air Act to restrict not only its authority to regulate, but also states' authority to do so. And it made several arguments related to something called preemption. And just for the non-lawyers on the call, there's kind of two types of preemption that EPA cited in its decision. One is a type of preemption called express preemption, which means that a statute contains explicit language that overrides state law, so that the statute is clear that only the federal government can act in a certain way. And then also field preemption, that federal regulation of a field is so pervasive and comprehensive that it implicitly precludes the state from regulating in the same area. So this is kind of an implied preemption argument. So EPA made both of these as it relates to states' authority, though we don't quite know what the effect of this statement would be in practical terms for Vermont. So this is where I'm just giving you the high level overview, but this is all still being evaluated. I did just want to show you a little graphic that I made on clip art to basically explain that in general, the federal Clean Air Act is the floor for regulation, at least as it relates to non-motor vehicles here on the left. So for most sources under the Clean Air Act, the federal standards are the floor, and the states are permitted to adopt more stringent regulations than the federal government when it comes to most sources. When you're on the right side of the screen looking at motor vehicles, the framework is different. So federal vehicles are the floor, and only California can adopt emission standards that are more stringent than the federal government. And then what are known as Section 177 states can adopt those more stringent regulations from California. So just wanted to provide this general overview. In general, most sources, the states can regulate more than the federal government to be more stringent, except for motor vehicles, in which case we can only follow the federal standards or follow California standards. I just have one more slide to kind of explain this a little more, just for folks that are new to this space. So in general, under the Clean Air Act, as I said, only EPA or California can set motor vehicle standards. EPA reviews California standards and issues what are called preemption waivers. So we already talked a little bit about preemption. This is what allows California to adopt standards that are more stringent than the federal. And then other states can adopt those standards to be more stringent, provided they're identical to California. And in order to be a Section 177 state, there's certain, not every state can follow California. In general, it's states with worse air pollution or states that are a part of the ozone transport region. So in Vermont, we are a Section 177 state, so we follow California motor vehicle standards in Vermont. Okay, so those are my slides. I know it's probably not satisfactory to have more information for you about what's going to happen next and what this means, but we did just want to make sure everyone had the updated information. So David, I'm happy to maybe answer questions or just leave it there.
Yeah, we have a little bit of time for questions. And again, I imagine there's a lot of, well, I'll just let you do questions here. Particularly, I think take advantage of Rachel being here so that you can get as much knowledge from her as possible. Rich?
Yeah, I'm just going to follow up on one aspect of what you said. I found it interesting to hear that on the one hand, EPA says that the regulation of greenhouse gases is a major question and Congress hasn't spoken to it, and therefore EPA can't act on it. And then on the other hand, they're saying that Congress has so fully acted that there's occupation of the field preemption, barring the states from acting. And it seems to me that, those two arguments are just absolutely inconsistent.
I think many lawyers would agree with that. I think you have hit the nail on the head in terms of what some of the potential legal contradictory arguments are. And I don't want to speculate on how that would play out. But definitely we are seeing kind of the arguing out of both sides of the mouth kind of thing happening. So just agreeing with what you're saying and that there's definitely some contradictory arguments being made.
Thanks, Rach. I'll note David Grass put in the chat well, you can read the chat. It's what he describes as a science-based rebuttal to the Department of Energy report that was used to be the justification of EPA's action. Okay. All right. Well, Rachel, thanks for the update. Really appreciate it. It's helpful to be clued in to really what's going on. I imagine this is the beginning of a large legal battle, right?
Yeah, this just happened in like late February, so there's still a lot evolving in this space, and certainly when there's meaningful updates, we can figure out how to come back and. But I mean, this is also something that you can follow in the news. This is a pretty big issue in the environmental climate space. So just want to encourage you to kind of stay tuned to those conversations as they evolve.
Super. Okay. All right. So that's a national level update from Rachel. Julie was going to update us on what's going on with the proposed greenhouse gas reporting rule, which is in the legislature now, state legislature. So Secretary Moore, over to you.
Sure. So the bill that sort of acted on the report or the memo that ANR submitted coming out of our climate action plan back in mid-December is H740. It started in the House Energy and Digital Infrastructure Committee, and they worked on it at some length, looking at sort of both the narrow recommendation, I guess I would describe, that ANR provided about simply ensuring that it was clear in statute we had the authority to adopt rules to create a comprehensive greenhouse gas emissions reporting program. There was discussion around biomass and also stationary sources. But ultimately, I think ended up very close to the words on the page in the memo ANR had submitted that we talked about at our last Climate Council meeting about just using this bill to make clear that the Secretary of ANR does have the authority to adopt these rules. We have worked with the committee about the budget necessary to support this work. As folks may recall, at the last Climate Council meeting, we talked about needing a $500,000 base appropriation to cover 2 staff positions and then also sort of the maintenance of a reporting system along with money for third-party compliance, knowing that, or third-party verification of compliance, I should say, knowing that ultimately the intention for a greenhouse gas reporting rule could be to serve as the basis for a regulatory program, as well as $300,000 to actually build the interface people would report into. In talking with the committee further about timing, we believe we can meet the needs for the development of the tool if there is simply $500,000 of base funding provided for the work. That is the way the bill was voted out of House Environment. I believe it was a 6-3-0 vote. It then went over to House Appropriations. Chair James was in there at the end of last week presenting the bill to House Appropriations. My understanding is they have some follow-on questions. I'm not sure if she's going back into House Appropriations or will simply be following up with them in writing, but they have not taken action on the bill as of yet. Because they're a money committee, folks may be aware last week was crossover, meaning bills really needed to be on their way from one body of one side of the legislature to the other. This bill did make crossover from that perspective in that it came out of its policy committee, but it does need to see action by appropriations this week in order to continue forward. And so maybe with that, would pause there and happy to answer any questions folks might have. And once I'm done talking, I can find the link and drop the House calendar link in the chat so you can see exactly what was voted out of House Energy.
Thanks, Julie. I know some of you are also attentive to what's going on in the legislature. But any questions for Julie or others who are tracking this? Again, this is a priority that you as a council identified. Thanks for dropping in the chat. Any questions?
Maybe I should just add, David, given the sort of significant budget challenges writ large this year, I would say it's far from certain that this will advance out of the House Appropriations Committee. I know that coming up with a $500,000 base appropriation is challenging, I believe, and Secretary Clark can correct me if I'm wrong, but there was a line to the effect that House Appropriations had $200 million or so in additional requests beyond the governor's recommend and had a fraction of that available to fulfill those requests. I don't know, Sarah, if you can up the accuracy in my statements.
Yeah, I understand that they're actually coming closer to $300 million in requests above the governor's recommend. But really, we'll know this week what the House Appropriations Committee will be recommending to be funded in addition to the GovRec. So more clarity by the end of the week.
Thank you. Helpful. Okay. Any questions on this topic? Okay. Great. Okay. Speaking of your recommendations, Sophie, I believe is here.
Hey, David, I'm gonna fill in for Sophie today.
Excellent. So Liz will fill in for Sophie. There is a sort of final design of the Climate Action Plan update 2025. Liz, I'll turn it over to you if you want to share your screen with it or what you want to say about that.
Thank you. Yeah, we just wanted to highlight that Sophie did a lot of really amazing work with the contractor Image Farm to complete a graphically designed and copy edited version of the updated climate action plan, and that's now on our website. So feel free to check it out and share with your networks. There's the full updated plan, and then there's also a summary document. And there's also, I'll send out a link, there is a document of climate stories of Vermonters that you can also access that's live on the website now. That's the update.
Great. So you'll see it's a nice interface on the website that Sophie's been working on. Feel free to click through it and the different pieces and see what you got. In addition to all the contractor support of sort of beautifying the report and making it look better. Any quick questions for Liz or Jane about this? Okay. Leslie Ann?
Not so much a question, but some kudos because it looks really, really good, came together very nicely. Maybe the question is, are we going to plan to push that out so that folks can really appreciate the time and effort that we as a council, we as subcommittees, we as everybody who put time and effort into this could really appreciate all the hard work that's been done. Any thoughts on that?
Great question. I don't know, Jane, Liz, if Sophie were here, she might have a few things to say, but Jane or Liz, do you want to say a word about sort of how to spread the word on the climate action plan now that it's in a more beautified way?
Yeah, happy to. We had the executive summary turned into the summary that is on the website prior to our public meetings that we had. So we were sharing it via the public meetings that we had in midwinter. And then Sophie maintains a contact list and shared it with all the people who participated in those meetings, as well as through our newsletter that has amassed quite a big listserv that we send out to every month. Beyond that, I'm not sure if there's any further plan to do anything with it, but we have been sharing it and letting folks know who have engaged with us that it's there now.
Cool. Because I know like the chapter that I was fortunate to co-lead, I have that in my signature file for my email. So that's one way I'm kind of like subtly getting the word out. Go read that particular chapter. Go read that. Yeah.
That's nice. That's really nice. Okay. And maybe we take that, Leslie Ann, as a note from this meeting of what are creative pathways that all of us could be disseminating this information now that it's very easily accessible online.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Great. Okay. Great. And thanks. I see some kudos in the chat as well. All right. So if Caroline is here, I might turn it over, or Eric, I don't know if you're doing this. But we were going to get an update on Vermont's hazard mitigation plan.
Caroline is on and she was going to do it.
Yes,
Okay.
I am here.
Great.
All right.
Yeah.
Do I have sharing capabilities or is Liz
You
going to
do.
share? Okay. I'm so used to Teams.
Yeah, sorry about the Zoom.
I need to apologize about it. So share and then
You pick the window and
the screen. There we go. All right, how's that working?
perfect.
All right, great. Okay, so I am Caroline Paskey, State hazard mitigation supervisor over at Vermont Emergency Management. We do both the state hazard mitigation plan, running the hazard mitigation grant program, flood resilient communities fund, and we also have the local hazard mitigation plans. This presentation is on the implementation of our 2023 state hazard mitigation plan and the priorities that were set by the steering committee and partners in December for 2026. We'll advance to our next slide. All right, so I think everyone here is pretty familiar with the state hazard mitigation plan, but just in case, it is our blueprint for statewide action. It addresses vulnerabilities that we identify through the planning process. It focuses on natural hazards and overall improving resilience of our communities so we can reduce the need to respond in the midst of an emergency. It is a climate adaptation plan. And we assess all the environmental hazards that can potentially impact the planning area of Vermont. We update it every 5 years. So our next update will be coming up. We're getting ramping up for that for 2028. And the state hazard mitigation plan, what most people care about is that it makes it so that we're eligible for FEMA funding after a disaster and for hazard mitigation grant programs. So those public assistance dollars that the state gets, that municipalities get, as well as the money that we use for buyouts and so on. Within the state plan, we look at fluvial erosion, movement of rivers, inundation, flooding, heat, wind, snow, ice, drought, infectious disease outbreak, cold, invasive species, landslides, wildfire, earthquake, and hail. And for each of these hazards, we look at the potential impacts to our community assets. So thinking about the built environment, people, economy, and our natural environment, both our ecosystems, our habitat, as well as our improved resources like agriculture. So in 2023, we had a total of 112 actions, and we had originally 43 priority actions with these top 10 priority actions. In 2025, we set 14 top priority actions. And then in this year, we're setting 2 overarching priorities to really emphasize the collaboration that's going to be happening over the next year. We have our goal areas within the mitigation strategy to focus on environment and natural systems, built environment, plans and policies, and education and outreach. So very much thinking about that long-term risk reduction, our land use planning decisions, not just about training your EMDs or getting a new fire truck. It's very much long-term planning. So while VEM manages the state hazard mitigation plan, it is a collaboration amongst agencies. So many people that are here today had a hand in developing the state plan, both hazard profiles, prioritizing and ranking our hazards and our risk assessment, and then identifying which actions were priorities to implement within our 5-year time frame. We at VEM do manage our implementation tracking tool, which is on our website. And this helps us track the progress in our mitigation actions. It's accessible to the action leads whenever they need to make updates, and then informs our annual report. So here's a short list of our partners, and the stakeholders, agencies, our academic partners, and a few other NGOs. So what I think that many people here are interested in is, how does this cross over with the climate action plan, and even the resilience implementation strategy? Marion over at the Climate Action Office and I, we are always in the midst of coordination, and in the last year, we've been really trying to figure out, okay, how do we take this from something that we really want to do to really starting to integrate these plans? And so I'll be showing you a little bit about how we did that through the annual report. But we very much are trying to figure out ways to make sure that these plans are truly integrated in their implementation and speaking to each other back and forth, and how we can really reduce, a lot of the time and energy that is spent in developing them when we could be having that energy invested in something that's happening at the same time and together. So a little bit about our annual report. This is in 2024. These are the steps that we had. We had implemented actions or completed actions that addressed 6 different hazards. Of course, fluvial erosion, top hazard, ice, flooding, snow, wildfire, and wind. And then in the last year, we've been able to complete actions that address all of the hazards that are within the state hazard mitigation plan. So a lot of great progress is being made by all partners within the state hazard mitigation plan. And I'll jump a little bit into some of those accomplishments. So in 2025, we had many advancements in understanding drought in Vermont. The drought task force was implemented. We're discussing how to update our various drought plans and really moving that science piece forward in our planning and implementation phases. So a lot of great progress has been made within understanding drought in Vermont. The river corridor and wetland easements were expanded, protecting 307 acres statewide since 2023. Public Service Department, they initiated development of a statewide electric grid resilience framework to address increasing outage risks from extreme weather. And we hope to integrate some of this work within the state hazard mitigation plan update when that comes around. There was an expanded transportation resilience planning tool. So it now integrates our rail infrastructure, and they each have their flood risk scores applied there within that tool. Over at the Climate Action Office, there was the launching of the Climate Conversations. So this integrated some of the work happening at the Climate Action Office with linguistically diverse community leaders, and really trying to reach a broader audience with those resources. There was an advancement in the statewide performance and tracking tool for climate resilience outcomes, which I think everyone in this room is very familiar with. We launched new publicly accessible tools and databases. Our Climate Action Office did on climate adaptation work across state agencies. Really, really great reference tool through the RIS work. To strengthen flood disclosure requirements for property transactions. And we created a state-led buyout program to reduce local burden and increase efficiency in FEMA processes. It's a really huge, huge lift. All of these achievements. All right, those were the achievements for this last year. I'm going to next go into what our priorities were for 2026, but I wanted to pause really quickly in case anyone wanted me to explain anything.
Any questions for Caroline on what happened in 2025? Or the coordination with Climate Action Office and the plan, the Climate Action Plan? Okay. Seems clear, Caroline.
So, like I was mentioning, Marion and I sat down and we really were trying to figure out how to plan a workshop for December that we have our annual SHIMP meetup implementation meeting to really assess how it's going in terms of implementation. And we wanted to really see how we could get people talking about how the work connects and how we could find efficiencies and really support each other and emphasize the collaboration that's necessary to move this work forward. And so we did this through a workshop, and we presented to the participants in the workshop some of the information that we're seeing in local hazard mitigation plans in terms of gaps and planning resources and knowledge gaps and what they really need in terms of support there. And we had a great presentation on drought to understand that that's one of our priority hazards that we're looking at currently. And then we were able to really, crosswalk many actions from the state hazard mitigation plan with the resilience implementation strategy. We've previously done this with the climate action plan and really understand, these many things are phrased differently there, but they're very much related, and how we can better coordinate that work. So the two priorities that came out from our discussions that day, we are looking to improve data sharing and mapping tool accessibility. So don't just create more data, don't just create more tools, but how do we really make sure that people can use them? And to strengthen state support for local implementation. Again, how are we actually seeing that these get utilized and implemented at the local level? And how do we really support that local action? So some of what we're calling perhaps quick wins, those steps that we need to take within the first half of this year, were our kind of the breakdown of our priorities. So we will be completing statewide land site hazard mapping, assessing tax and foreclosed properties for potential buyout prioritization, strengthening data sharing between VEM and DEC wetlands program, and improving accessibility of digitized dam inundation areas. We'll be looking to update the inventory of hazard planning map products, what the best map products are currently, assess and implement opportunities for increasing the groundwater monitoring network, integrate drought impact survey data into local hazard mitigation plans, evaluate the true impact of the Emergency Management Preparedness Grant Program and moving resilience forward. There's been many challenges with that program, the federal level. Advance the statewide resilience hub assessment. Really exciting work to move that forward. Inventory all applicable guidance materials for after a disaster. So how can we quickly be able to share that information that helps everyone understand the programs that are available? Coordinate across agencies on wildland fire mitigation. We will complete our buyout reuse guidance. Integrate DEC Rivers program-led study on barriers to environmental and social equity into all of our work and our planning efforts, and support the development of a combined LHMP and town plan. So all of these projects are, they're at least two partners working together to implement this work. And if anyone wants to find out more details about each of those actions, they can definitely go to the annual report. I'll drop the link in the chat. And within the annual report, you can see exactly which state actions and which RIS actions apply to each of those priorities. So as I mentioned, we need to have the 2028 SHMP FEMA approved by November 2028. So we'll be ramping up that process and definitely open to hearing about, what other folks would like to see in there that's not already there, or how we can make that, speak to what you need currently more. We do have an application pending with FEMA right now under what we call HNGP 4720. And so we'll hopefully see that funding, but I'm sure everyone has seen the news and all of the questions that still remain. But this update we're really excited about because it's really about how we can make the whole state plan more accessible and integrated with our other planning processes. It will be a platform for really understanding risk for each hazard. It could be the primary reference for both our local towns. It will auto-populate local hazard mitigation plan profiles to reduce that local burden, and can also be used by other entities like our utilities to better coordinate with the towns and what their priorities are, and really be speaking to each other in a more collaborative way. So it really, the focus is on that risk-based investment, reducing local planning burden, and overall making the plan content more accessible and usable than it currently is as a PDF. And if anyone's seen what the state plan over in New York looks like, that's one of our that is a huge inspiration and a model for us in Mitigate New York, and really looking at how we can really make this intuitive and usable for folks. So I will stop there.
Thanks, Caroline. Maybe if someone knows that, has a link to that New York plan, you want to drop that in the chat too. You can inspire us all. David Mears, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Caroline. That was hugely helpful, and it seems like a robust plan for 2026. And I really particularly appreciate the way that the state is increasingly playing a stronger role in helping local governments. That's long been one of the Achilles heels for Vermont. It's relying on our 250 some odd communities. I had two questions. One I think is probably easy to answer. One may be harder. The easier question is I'm curious, and without Chris Campany here to pipe up on this, I'm curious in terms of how how we're investing in the roles of the regional planning commissions to be part of the work of supporting local governments and as we expand the state role. And then the second harder question is the extent to which this future planning takes into account the proposed rollbacks in federal engagement in the emergency management and hazard mitigation arena.
Yeah, super question. So the first one on the RPCs, so they are very much integrated into everything we do. They are often the ones that are contracted by our towns to create and update their local hazard mitigation plans. Because of the way the federal funding works, the towns do have to go out to bid, and they could be hiring a private consultant, but many of them hired the RPC, and so they're the ones doing that local planning. And when we're updating the state plan, they have the opportunity to provide input to us in terms of, we do outreach on, what are they seeing in their communities and their regions in terms of some of the greatest vulnerabilities? What are some of the challenges that our folks are facing? So we do a like surveys and meetings and outreach in those terms, but very much what they're putting into a local hazard mitigation plan then informs the next state hazard mitigation plan. So for example, in the last several years, we're seeing a lot more on like landslides and on flash flooding. And so we can take that as the cue to improve what we're doing in the state plan on those hazards and building out those resources so that we're reflecting what's happening at the local level. So kind of speaking back and forth. And we want the next update, we want to be able to auto-populate basically a lot of hazard profiles for our local plans, but we want them speaking back and forth very much. So that's how RPCs are primarily integrated. And then in terms of, understanding or planning for our future uncertainty, I think that we just always have to have a mentality of like, we keep on moving forward generally. And so I'll caveat it with that, but we very much have had to respond to, different mapping tools and resources being taken away from us, somewhat unpredictably or maybe very predictably. So it's a lesson in understanding that we can't always depend on things that we thought would never change, right? We thought it would take an act of Congress to change it, and that's what everyone said, and then things just get taken away. So we are so fortunate that we have tools that have been under development, particularly through the Climate Action Office, that allow us to do a lot of planning around environmental justice and equity as it relates to hazards and climate change. But we want to make sure that we continue to build on those. There's certain tools that we still have available at the federal level and are extremely good. Like the National Risk Index is an extremely valuable tool, but they've taken things out of it that we very much need to be paying attention to when we're planning in our communities. So we want to make sure that we have the tools and the knowledge and the stability necessary to kind of make it through that uncertainty. But I don't know if Eric, you wanted to say anything else there.
You covered it very well. The hardest part of the situation that we're in this grant and all our other grants is the unknowns, right? They haven't been taken away, but they also haven't been delivered. So you can't go right or left because you don't know what the trajectory is. So we're kind of in a hold pattern while we try to figure it out. So looking at lots of options, trying to figure out the best way to not keep all our eggs in one basket. We're doing all of those things. It's a great question.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks, Caroline. I see Jane has a hand up. Jane, go ahead.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. I wanted to respond to the first comment that David made in building on what Caroline was saying, and then Caroline also sparked another comment I wanted to just quickly make. At the local level, I just wanted to highlight a project that Marion and I, and now Marion's really leading, but after the rollout of the initial climate action plan in 21, Marion and I had significant contacts from a lot of municipalities about having us come and present on the climate action plan, and municipalities asking us how they could adapt it for their use. Understanding that the state climate action plan is really that, a state plan, and not scalable to municipal level action at all the time. We've engaged a partnership actually really closely with VEM, with Caroline is on the committee with us, Agency of Commerce and Community Development, and then the Public Service Department, in large part to develop a municipal planning guides around climate action. And what that is looking like is 3 different guides right now: a social resilience guide, a municipal plan guide, and a capital planning guide, and how you fold climate action into all 3 of those. And we have a contract that goes for another 8 months or so. And that is currently being piloted with 6 municipalities, 2 for each of the guides. And we'd be happy to share an update on that work going forward with the Climate Council. But we're really hopeful that these guides will help support communities in folding in climate action, or helping them understand the power of developing a local hazard mitigation plan, et cetera. We didn't want to reinvent the wheel and have municipalities writing new and different plans, but really understanding the leverage that they can already make through their current planning efforts. And so that's a really exciting effort that's underway, and these guides will be delivered at the end of 26. And then the second point I was just going to make, we have a RFP currently open through the business registry at the state, where Marion is leading the work to take the municipal vulnerability indicators tool, which was the first iteration of what was required in the Global Warming Solutions Act, to produce a municipal vulnerability index. And we are now adapting that to something called the Vermont Adaptation and Risk Index, working closely again with Caroline and VEM around how that links to the state hazard mitigation plan, how it can be used for tracking indicators of risk and adaptation for the state hazard mitigation plan. But encourage folks, and we can drop that RFP in the chat, because it also looks at how we align around downscaled climate modeling to agree upon some forecasting for the state, and then also think about how we prioritize criteria for resilience and adaptation projects. So there's a lot happening in this space. So appreciate Caroline here talking about the state hazard mitigation plan, and just want to really emphasize the amazing coordination between VEM and the Climate Office and other state partners around resilience, because it's all very integrated and really needs to be thought about together to make it actionable at all the different levels.
Thanks, Jane. Yeah, inspiring. Any other reflections or comments on all this work that's happening? Stephanie?
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you so much for all of this. And you had mentioned that you were going to pop into the chat the link, and I don't see it yet. So if you do have a chance to do that, I would love to have that. Thank you. Just so coincidentally, while we were on this meeting, the gentleman who's responsible for updating our hazard mitigation section of our town plan just called me, and I said, "Are you aware of all these things that are going on the state level?" He said, "Well, we never talked to the state. We talked to, as you said, the Planning Commission, and we have them look over what we're doing to update it. But I'm looking forward to sharing that link with him. Thank you."
Yeah, thank you. So that's the direct link to the annual report I just dropped in there. And I also promised the Mitigate New York link in case anyone's curious, so I'll grab that.
Thank you. Okay. Leslie Ann?
Caroline, while you pop in the Mitigate New York link, as soon as you do that, I'll pop in the Mitigate Vermont link that my students had created for you specifically as part of the work that they did with the climatology and natural hazards class last semester. So we'll do a 1-2.
It is a visualization of the future. Yes.
Yep.
Great. Good stuff. Okay. And just for if anyone's listening in, the word mitigate is used in these different contexts. And just if you're new to this space, it means one thing in Caroline's world, and it means another thing in the climate action world, where mitigate's typically referred to as the climate emissions reduction. All right. Any other reflections or questions for Caroline and the team over there? Okay, great. So thank you, Caroline. And it's really inspirational to see how well state government is coordinating these days on all these issues. We schedule now public comment. So if you've been joining our meeting today and you're interested in making a comment or asking a question, this is the time to do it. So I will pause. Feel free to raise your hand in the Zoom. It's usually at the bottom of your Zoom screen. There'll be something that says raise hand, or you can wave your hand and get my attention if your camera's on. But any comments or questions from folks who have been observing our meeting today? Okay. Great. Okay. There's one more thing we wanted to do before we finish up today, and that is an outlook for our meetings. And I take to heart Stephanie's request of like, hey, what are we really doing this year? What's my job? And it's tricky, right? Because it is a quote unquote off year in the sense it's not a year in which you're actively engaged in updating the plan, which is your primary responsibility as dictated in the Global Warming Solutions Act. So what does this off year look like, right? What is this? And what the steering committee's talked about is quarterly meetings of the council for the remainder of the year. And to do meetings a little bit like this, where we're updating each other on what's going on, trying to stay current on how things are evolving and what it's going to mean when you have to pick things back up and start imagining an update to the plan in 2027, 2028. So the vision forward is let's do these quarterly check-ins. Let's focus them primarily around these kinds of update conversations. If there's action that needs to happen, whether it's sort of just practical process action, like today we had some of that, we do that. So that's the vision, and steering committee members feel free to provide a little more nuance than I'm saying on that. And we just wanted to confirm with all of you that that approach for the council, in addition to what we talked about earlier in the meeting for subcommittee members or subcommittees, that is the right vision for the council. So I'd welcome any discussion about that, questions, steering committee members weigh in about sort of the vision that you've had about this. Um, just let me pause here. Any comments, questions, clarifications about this vision of quarterly meetings going forward? Okay, great. And we'll schedule the length to be what we needed. Today we needed an hour and a half roughly, right? And so maybe we keep a 2 hour block, but if we don't need it, we don't use it, right? Um, what else? Jane or Liz Amler, is there anything else you want to say about this sort of looking forward and what counselors can expect?
Keep an eye out for calendar invitations from me. That's all I'll say. Moving forward.
Yes, correct. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Okay, that's great. Now, there's one thing I didn't do at the front end.
David,
Yeah, Jane. Yeah.
I'm just going to flag in the spirit of transparency, the steering committee also meets monthly, and council members are obviously always welcome to join there for updates more frequently. And we can start to think about when and if lots of councilors join those, how to make space for additional comments.
Thanks, Jane. That's right. Yeah. Okay. Now, I failed to do one thing at the front end of this meeting is we have Jackie Pratt is here, the newest member of the council. And Jackie, I didn't do a hello and a welcome at the top of this meeting. So I thought I'd just give you a space to say hi to your fellow counselors so that we can welcome you into the fold, even in this sort of more relaxed pace of council meetings 2026 than 2027, 2028 will be. But Jackie, over to you to say hi.
Great. I'm Jackie Pratt. I work for Stowe Electric Department. I am taking Liz Miller's place in representing the distribution utilities, and I'm super happy to be here. I know some of you, others I don't. I'm looking forward to working with all of you and learning more about the great work that you've done so far and putting our heads together as we move forward. So thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thanks, Jackie. We're glad to have you with us. Um, anything else, counselors? I'm forgetting that things you want to say before we finish up. David?
Well, I'm not disagreeing with the quarterly meeting proposal. I think I had this somewhat naive idea that the having produced the report, that this group would be more engaged in advancing the kind of the proposals and serving as a resource to policymakers than is really possible given the nature of our, each of us as individuals and our time frame and so forth. But I do, and and I'm not over at the at the State House, thank goodness very much. So I'm free of some of the chaos over there. But it does seem to me that this is a year in which, given budget and broader dynamics, that the advocates that are traditionally aligned with some of the proposals in the plan are more playing defense than offense. And I guess I'm just sharing a perspective that it feels a little like a missed opportunity for us as a state. And I'm not pointing fingers at anyone else, maybe mostly at myself. But it does seem like we have to continue to make progress, transformative progress, and that means at a public policy level, finding those things that there's alignment, broad alignment around, and working hard to sustain them. So I know that's hard in a year where the budgets are under such huge pressure. But I share that as a kind of a broader observation. I don't know if others are sharing that perspective or if there's a sense, any energy or ideas that people have for ways that each of us as individuals on the Climate Council can be more active or engaged in ways that would help advance the broad goals of the Climate Action Plan.
I really appreciate that comment, David. And it is an open invitation if folks want to reflect on that right now on this call of sort of what role might each of you play, even if the council itself is not the body for implementing this, but what role might each of you play? I know some of you have been involved in the legislation, and you all have a protocol of when committees and others want to hear about the climate action plan, about who shows up. provide that testimony. But any quick reflections on David's points before we finish up today? Right, right. In this, there's this push and pull a little bit about the role of the council, right? The role of the council is to create this climate action plan, and state government and others need to go implement, right? And so, what is your role in this phase of more implementing the plan, which is more sort of in the wheelhouse of state government to go do, right? I think that's kind of like the interesting push and pull that David you're naming and Stephanie you're putting in as well. Okay. There's maybe not a clear answer to this. Yeah, Stephanie, go ahead. And then Rich.
I guess I would just add that, and somewhat naively, I completely acknowledge, but just a few weeks ago, I was up testifying in front of a committee, energy committee, and then I went to another committee and I saw Secretary Moore and Jane. They were there to testify as well, and I just I wasn't there as a Vermont Climate Council member. I need to make that clear, but as rather from coming from an energy committee and being a citizen. But I guess I also maybe misunderstood and thought that we would also continue to be, for whatever bills did make the crossover, that then shouldn't like now the senators wouldn't they want to hear, or has that already been planned? Secretary Moore, are you already planning on going before the Senate? Should it go there?
So I do regularly appear in the legislature, especially when invited in. In this instance, I was sort of walking them through the content of the memo, but I would say in terms of advocacy, for like voicing support for actually moving it forward, to me, that's something that sort of falls to probably individual climate counselors to decide how they want to engage. The Climate Council asked for the memo, received a report on the memo, endorsed the memo, and so I can reflect that in my testimony. But where it sits on the legislature's overall list of priorities in a challenging budget year is a hard position for the agency to take when we have other asks in front of the legislature. And to me, that is a potential space that, where the Climate Council may wish to engage, or members of the Climate Council may wish to engage.
And I think it's worth noting that there is some sort of like quote unquote protocol that you all set up about how if the legislature or committees reach out to hear about the climate action plan, and maybe Jane, if you're still on, can confirm. I don't want to get it wrong.
Yep.
Just
I'm
like,
happy to.
yeah. What is there is a standard protocol that we have around this.
Yeah, hopefully, Liz, since I'm in transition, if you wouldn't mind putting the governance document in, which I know counselors are all onboarded with, but just as a reminder, because it does speak to testimony in there. But actually, when Stephanie just referred to the testimony that Secretary Moore and I were supporting in House Transportation, that's a good example where there was a House Transportation Committee asking for an overview of the transportation recommendations in the plan. And therefore, they came to the administration. We reached out to the steering committee rep and legislative appointment with the expertise in transportation, Joey Miller, and asked her to join. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to join that day, and I think there was some back and forth with the chair trying to schedule that, but I'm not sure, Joey, you can speak to how that went, but in general, there is outreach to the co-chairs of the subcommittee of jurisdiction and a recommendation around who goes in around expertise for the topic. I'll just note, though, that I think House Energy and Digital Infrastructure, and others should comment, was really the only committee that asked for a broad overview of the climate action plan this time. And I know other counselors were in along with administration staff to provide that from different perspectives, but it was a little different than the first climate action plan, where I felt like there were like a lot of testimony requests at a high level on the plan itself and what was in it. It felt a little less like people were clamoring to understand it this time. So just a note or observation about that. And then the greenhouse gas reporting program has been the star show, and it has received both administration like recommendations and testimony, as well as council members. But that document spells it out clearly, what I just spoke to at a high level.
Thanks, Jane. Really helpful. Jared?
Yeah, I was just going to offer that at least on H740, the greenhouse gas reporting requirement bill, the chair of the committee, or the committee assistant, I should say, did reach out to individual counselors to request testimony. So in addition to Secretary Moore and Jane, I know I testified on that bill in my council capacity. I believe Joey did. And I believe Matt Coda did, although I don't know if that was in your council capacity or in your role on behalf of the Vermont fuel dealers. There is an important distinction that we all as counselors need to make when we're speaking as an individual counselor or on behalf of our employer versus on behalf of the council as a whole. And I know Matt was taking a position that was at odds with what the council recommended.
Just to interrupt you, Jared, I took a position that's consistent with my vote. I took a position consistent with the Vermont Retail Grocers Association, the Vermont Fuel Dealers Association.
Right. And I'm just saying that was not the position of the Vermont Climate Council as a whole. And so there's sometimes a distinction between what an individual counselor, their opinion is versus what the action of the council as a whole is. My main point in bringing this up is just to say that that on some specific bills, legislators or committee assistants will reach out to specific counselors. So I just wanted folks to know that on greenhouse gas reporting, there were some legislative appointees to the council who also were invited to testify and did so.
Okay.
But I would agree with Jane's assessment that generally there have been fewer requests for kind of broad overviews of the plan, the recommendations of the plan, and fewer requests that are like, sometimes, especially after the first plan, there was an email that would come into the Climate Action Office or some of the steering committee members to say, who from the council should present on this? We want to hear about the council's recommendations. And I have not seen or heard of those type of general requests at this point. Usually there's a specific question and committee chairs make specific invitations based on their knowledge of the council and the different roles.
Okay. All right, folks. Okay. Rich, you had your hand up at one point. Did you want to chime in on this?
Well, just really briefly, I want to endorse what the implication of what David Mears was saying, that it has been the practice of the council that all counselors should feel empowered to respond to an invitation from the legislature or from a regional planning commission or the select board of a town or whoever to provide information about what's in the climate action plan. And as everybody has said, there is a protocol for doing so when you're speaking only as an individual member of the council, and you need to clearly say that. But that has been the practice. I think it's a good practice. And I would just say to any counselor who's invited that you should feel that it's okay. And in fact, very consistent with the role of the council to go out and explain to people what's in the plan and your view of it.
Thanks, Rich. Yeah. Okay, folks. I think with that, we're getting close to the end here. Any last minute things before we sign off? Okay. Great. Well, we will see steering committee members in a month or so. We will see the rest of you in a quarter. And feel free to reach out, obviously, in between. Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate everybody's chiming in on this. We have a better plan now for subcommittees than we did going into it. Thank you, everybody, and see you next time.